So with Game of Thrones wrapping up, I should probably watch that series, but it seems like everybody is trying to find the next big thing. Amazon's got their Wheel of Time show coming out, and I think I heard that they're doing something on Lord of the Rings, and Netflix seems to be throwing all their weight behind this Witcher series, which I'm sure I'll love to hate.
I'll take that chance.
I'll give it a shot, don't worry. And despite the fact that this channel has mostly been about TV, video games, and movies, I'm actually more of a reader than I am anything else. Well, reader and audiobooks. I like to listen to audiobooks while I clean. You know, when a good book is out, my house is very clean, but I just wanted to talk about a series that I don't think is talked about as much, but I think is just as good as a lot of these other long-running series. And that is the Spellmonger series by Terry Mancourt. Spoilers throughout, but the series is good enough to where it's truly the journey that matters, not the destination. Meaning most of these things are going to be worth your while, even if you know what's going to happen. And the main reason I like this series so much is I don't think it falls into a lot of common pitfalls I see in, like, a lot of fantasy writing, or writing in general, really. What do I mean by that? Well, let me explain. This first one is more of a problem in more, let's say, visual mediums. It doesn't tend to be as big of an issue in a lot of books. I think it's worth noting that in a lot of fantasy universes, the world is kind of sexless. And no, I'm not talking about how fantasy armor is impractical, a la Terra Online. I'm more talking about the fact that nobody tends to mention that. Like, you'll be in, like, this fantasy world, and you'll see these incredibly attractive characters, and they won't, like, mention that in universe. It just leads to the world feeling weirdly sexless. And when this happens, it tends to lead towards sex in the universe being defined by, let's call it the fan artists, but everyone knows what I'm talking about when I say that. And due to the nature of this particular brand of fan art, it leads the entire world to feel a bit non-consensual, let's just say. Which, this isn't a big issue in a lot of things, but particular video games have this issue. Games like World of Warcraft, Terra Online, or Dragon Age, it's not so much that the characters are dressed in revealing clothing, it's that, well, everyone in the world doesn't seem to notice this. That just makes the world feel weirdly sexless. And the Spellmonger series really avoids that by pointing out that sex is a huge part of a lot of people's lives. And yeah, people are going to use magical assistance for that. They just are. And it goes into detail on this, so the world isn't defined by the fan art. There's my weirdly insightful thing for the day. But that leads into the broader trend of the series, in that I find it to be one of the most realistic depictions of a fantasy world that I've ever seen. And when I say realistic, I don't mean realistic in the sense that it's just depressing, because a lot of people confuse those two things. A realistic world is mostly mundane. When I say that the world is mundane, what I mean is the people in the world treat it like things that they come across are what you would expect to see in this world. One of the things I really appreciated about Seth MacFarlane's new series, The Orville, is at various points throughout the series, you can see the crew just sort of having conversations while doing the daily grind of being on a starship. You know, they'll be cutting an asteroid in half to have it avoid hitting a planet, and they'll just be talking about their relationships or whatever happened on TV last night or something. And that's the type of realistic modernity that I like. It makes the world feel lived in to have people that are used to this in the world. And the Spellmonger series does this very well. The name of the series is based on a job in the universe, a spellmonger, which is little better than, like, your local village wizard.
Sure, blame the wizards.
There's somebody who you might get to cast a charm on your chicken coop to keep foxes away, or help get rid of rats. A dozen and one little mundane things like that. The magic is mundane in the sense that people are used to seeing it, and it makes the world just feel that much more lived in. Because a lot of universes will make their magic system almost feel separate from normal life, and in this universe, it's just kind of part of normal life, and I enjoy that. This also helps the flaws in the characters feel more real, too. For example, the main character, Min, is kind of a horn dog. Me and him have opposite problems, it would appear. But I'm not just talking about specific characters having more real flaws. Like, you know, fundamentally, this guy is a good person, but he is kind of, yeah. A lot of fantasy series, when they're trying to point out that, like, certain races can be just as flawed as human beings, certain fantasy races can be just as flawed as human beings, they tend to default to one of two things. They either make them essentially human, which, what the hell is the point then? Or they just play up certain flaws that Tolkien laid down. Elves can be kind of arrogant, or dwarves can be kind of greedy, orcs are fundamentally cowards. I think I've said this before. But this series finds a way to make the flaws of the races feel a bit more intrinsic to their race. And humans have all the faults that human beings have in real life, but we also have all the strengths. So the long-lived elf allegory in this universe they have flaws that are unique to an incredibly long-lived race. I will say that. I don't really want to spoil what those are. I just think that it's refreshing to see that people can look at this same, frankly, kind of tired set of tropes about, you know, certain fantasy races and how they all act like this, and find a unique flaw to the races that makes sense. You just don't see that a lot. Similarly, I like that the use of magic is incredibly clever in this universe. And when I say clever, I don't mean that, oh, the magic system is so great. Like, you'll hear, Brendan Sanderson books are famous for having really great magic systems, and they do tend to be very good, but a lot of the use of magic in fantasy tends to be fairly straightforward, and mostly based on power levels, or whatever you want to call it in universe. The Wheel of Time was pretty bad about this. Not to say that there wasn't exceptions into this. I rather liked Androl in the last 3 books, for example. He was not traditionally powerful, but powerful in his own way. This series as a whole tends to be very clever about its use of magic. A good example is from the first book. The plot happens, and for whatever reason, they're stuck in a siege, and the mages in this castle are having to mess with the opposing army in various ways. And there's a point where they're basically using a big showstopper spell to help the cavalry take out the attackers for a bit. They're going to regroup and come back later, but this really helps them stay alive. And you know what this big showstopper is? They cause everything in the opposing war camp to come on tide. That doesn't sound like a big thing. And everyone kind of mentions that. It's like, this doesn't really seem like it's a big deal, but then you realize the cumulative effect of everything coming undone. Everything that was tied in a knot or a bow or anything was undone. So people's belts fell off, shoes came untied, some cruder weapons completely fell apart, and this just created complete pandemonium in the opposing army. And that was a real clever use of magic, and I don't see that a lot in other fantasy series. A lot of fantasy authors create this magic system and are super proud of it so that they don't think about how it can extend outwards. And I like that the author seems to understand that it's more about the application of power rather than rather than just having raw power. And I appreciate that. Those were like a few of the major reasons I really like the series. Here are some smaller ones. I like that the main character and his best friend are just best friends, Min and Penny. And I like that they don't just end up being the power couple of the series. They actually both end up marrying people who can't do magic. And I always like seeing in media representations of men and women who are just friends. Maybe it's because I've always had a lot of female friends, but I just feel like too often they end up becoming a couple in these things, and it's unnecessary. There's a goddess that shows up every now and then called Brigga, and I always enjoy what she has to say about things. The foreshadowing is good enough in the series to where if you pay attention, you can figure out a twist that happens in like book 11 in book 1 if you're looking for it. Let's just say Horizon is a proper noun. That's my recommendation on a series that I don't think gets enough credit in the epic fantasy genre. Or heroic? I don't know what it specifically is.